We know about data and apps. So we have users, apps, data, and building. So once we started going down this path, we then said, okay, so we can figure out what the needs are of all of these, the people and the technologies that play in these different areas. The users just need the buildings to be operated, to be safe, healthy, etc. The apps needs to deliver itself to the users and get data. The data needs to be securely gathered, and the building just needs to be available 24/7. Right? So the needs are actually quite simple. Okay, so how does that help us? And the sort of the other aha that we had was that really when we're talking about users, we're not talking about one big group of users that behave the same. We're actually talking about types of users, different personas. And if we try and if we think about it, and we did a lot, they actually fall into two different buckets of users. The first that we describe as those users that are really more interested in the purpose of the building. So they're interested in the outcomes. And here we're talking about owners, managers. By managers, we mean somebody that's actually managing a facility. Think about a teacher in a school kind of thing, or a manager of a shop. And then the occupants themselves, people that actually consume the buildings. Those are users that are very interested in the purpose. They don't care about the technology or how the building is run. They just want to use the building for a specific purpose. Then there's a second layer of people which are all to do with the operations that actually manage the building on a daily basis. They're a different group of people than those that care about the purpose. So that's one of the ahas. The second aha was down the bottom there. It's not just buildings. We know that buildings have physical sort of steel, concrete, and equipment, and then it also has systems, the control systems, the automation systems, and everything else that we all know about. So we said that we really need to have two layers to identify the difference between those two sort of groupings of things, as it were. And then the smart, we discussed it a lot, and we came down to splitting the smart into 4 layers. From the top, we have the layer that we call delivery. So basically, that's all of the people, technologies, products that is involved in the delivery of the smarts to the users, the operators, and those interested in the purpose. Right. So it's actually how the smarts gets delivered. So that's kind of quite a new concept for us initially. So it's actually, I think everybody's sort of warming to that. And then there's the apps. I think that we really sort of we do understand what they are. The smart the digital application software that runs somewhere. And then we added this other layer called exchange. We actually went through a number of different iterations of different names for this, but we ended up with exchange. This is really where data gets moved from wherever the data is stored to the applications. It's where the data gets converted. If you think about middleware and integration, a lot of those things they're not apps, they're not data, they're actually an exchange mechanism to allow data to go to the right places. So we created that as a layer, as a very, very specific layer in the smarter stack. And then the last layer on the smarts section is the data, obviously. And here, again, it's relatively simple. It's how we store, normalize, and govern and manage the data. So we started with 3 levels and we ended up with 8. This is basically the 8. It's the same text as was on the previous slide. But this is basically the smarter stack, everything all in one. What was interesting is that we spent a few weeks on Monday Live discussing this, and somebody came up and said, okay, so this is actually good because it matches what Simon Sinek talks about all the time. He talks about how we should really start with why. That's kind of his book, I think. And so the purpose is really the why. Right. So if you can see here, the description of what purpose, this shorthand description, why is this being done? This being smart, right? Why are you making the building smart, right? You're not doing it for, no reason. Yet there is a reason. So that sort of fits into the why concept from Simon Sinek. And then the operations and delivery are really the hows. How the smarts is being used in operation, and also how the smarts is being delivered. And then everything from the apps below is the what's. Right? So we normally focus on the what's, but this sort of brings it all the way up to the why, so that we can get a better understanding of why we're doing things. So this was a good a good sort of a conversation that we had. So how do we use this? So we use the stack as a backdrop. So if I wanted to explain what products X is, and the idea is if I put it there, I don't really need to say anything else, right? It's obviously some kind of application, right? Then obviously we need to figure out what kind of application, but that's the next level. If I'm talking about technology Y, I'm obviously talking about data, and I'm talking about a company, it could be a brand. This is how you do it. So it's really a sort of a backdrop to communicating technologies, products, people, and companies between each other, between all of us in a consistent manner. So one of the things that we did first on this is trying to sort of figure out what's actually going on in the industry right now, and it's depicted in this slide. Really, if we think about it, the industry has been like this for the past 20, 30 years, since digital DDC sort of came online. We've been a vertically integrated BAS offering. So a company would provide the systems, would manage the data, would provide whatever exchange mechanisms necessary, would deliver the apps, and would even would create and maintain the apps, and would actually deliver it, whether it's talking about branches or actually systems. Right. So this typically in the past has been done in one company, right, with a solid line across or on the outside. And even on the owner side, typically this has all been done in-house, both the purpose and operation. We're moving from that model to model that's more like this, where it's composable, where you have things like analytics, which is just an app. I mean, it's not just an app, it is an app. It's a great app. And we have data that can be in the cloud or on-prem. We have different type of exchanges. We have services and standards like OpenADR, and we have middleware, et cetera, single pane of glass, things like digital twin can be seen as an operational thing. And so this is how we think the industry is organized and today, and should be organized in the future. And the only thing that's consistent is the physical. The building is the same building. So this is kind of the essence of what the smarter stack is all about. Some examples of use. This is just a sort of a sample categories. Some of them are kind of things like weather data warehousing. All of that obviously sits on the data layer. Gateways and middleware are all exchange type stuff. And single pane of glass, and even sort of one of the things that we start to think about is it's not just the technology, but it's the role or the company. So a consultant really is a delivery mechanism of obviously know-how and advice and things like that. So this is just an example of some categories. Somebody along the line asked, where's network here, right? On this layer, where does the network sit? Right? This is not a network ISO 7-layer thing. It's more about the business model and the components. And we said there is no network layer because the whole net connectivity and communication is really all the way up and down, right? So there is a purpose for communication, things like bandwidth and latency. And other things, and there is the things like firewalls are basically apps, and even on the physical side, things like conduit and twisted pair, they're physical attributes of communications, and the same goes for cybersecurity. Right? So cybersecurity is a top to bottom sort of concern with regards to smarter stack. Another way of using and looking at smarter stack is describing a requirement. So this is a fictitious high school requirement. Where one will be sitting across the table with a school superintendent or engineer of some sort, and you'd have a conversation. What is the purpose? Why do you think you want smart? I want scheduling. I want comfort. I want social interaction. I want critical safety. Right? What operations do you anticipate? how do you think things are going to be delivered with a local HVAC, with a managed service provider, et cetera, all the way down to the actual physical buildings that they have, right? So it can be used in sort of multiple ways. I want to do one more slide, and then we're going to move on. And it's really the important facet of this is that perspective matters a lot. So the smarter stack really only makes sense if you understand the perspective at which it's being presented, because different stakeholders in this industry will have different perspectives. So building owner would look at it from the top. They care about the purpose and maybe the operation, but maybe not much else beyond that. Somebody's involved in middleware would be interested in the exchange layer and how it goes up and down and maybe sideways. So depending on where you are, you'd have different perspective on the smarter stack. And just sort of keep that in mind when we see some other examples of this. Things like technology and standards, you can start to think about, where does Haystack live? So it's partly an exchange thing and it's partly a data thing, and so on. So I'm going to stop here and so that we can move on and we can come back and talk about some other examples of the smarter stack. So I'm going to go back here and hand it over to Rick.
I will unmute myself just in time. So going back just a little over a year as Monday Live and Otto and the really impressive group of thought leaders are sort of getting the language and the definitions of the industry and the smarter building space figured out. You might recall there were some other changes that were happening in the country. Specifically, there was an election that happened just a little over a year ago, and there was some change in administration and goals and agendas at the federal and state levels. And for those of you who don't know, before spending time with some of these startups over the last few years, I think I've worked for like half of you that are on this call. As I'm looking around. Before that, there was a little over a decade spent with Johnson Controls, and one of the roles that I had at Johnson Controls was as government affairs liaison to DC and to various governors and mayors' offices. And so it struck me at about a year ago that I was wondering aloud, who was it that was helping the new leadership at the federal level and state houses? Who was helping to set the agenda, set goals, and set the in some cases even set some of the numbers of the objectives we were hearing about. And it seemed odd that as we looked around, none of us that are on this call were the ones being asked what are the objectives and what are the numbers and what's going to be happening around this smarter infrastructure we were hearing about. And so we sort of did a little bit of checking around with some of the contacts that I maintained in DC and again at different governors and mayors' offices, and it turned out that there was a great interest in having some organized voices to help set that agenda and to help create the objectives that from the outside it looked like some of that had already been set, and some of the numbers of reductions in carbon, for instance, had already been set. But turns out that the leadership really did want to have industry help and they wanted to have confirmation that the industry was ready to actually deliver on some of these infrastructure and smarter building sort of opportunities. And the feedback also was that as an industry you need to organize, you need to create an industry or trade group, and if you're a 501c3 you're taken more seriously than if you are just an individual company. So we put together Coalition for Smarter Buildings, organized it as a 501c3, and through a little bit of iterative back and forth between meetings in Washington, D.C. and then meetings with some of the original founding members, we determined that there was some really interesting alignment between what the thought leaders and policymakers were looking for and what was evolving through some of this smarter stack development specifically. So a logo was created and some documents were filed, and we've had several really interesting, productive meetings with Department of Energy, with people from the White House CEQ, with different mayor and governor's offices, and the idea of being able to provide leadership and definition and structure for what some of this exciting agenda is taking really really nice shape. What have I forgot to mention, Anto? Oh, here we are. So I think we created C4SB just right around a year ago, and again, in those iterative meetings, the alignment was around the fact that we could really provide thought leadership around the specification using the smarter stack. They were very interested. Administration was very interested in definitions and structure around workforce development, and then more recently we've talked about the fact that having reference models and templates is going to be something that people want. And this isn't just about the governors and the mayors. This is also about everybody that's in the communities that the governors and the mayors represent. But the governors and the mayors can use their own buildings as representative buildings to motivate and to show the rest of the community, hey, here's what you can accomplish if you do things this new and different way. So leadership by example is why we talk a lot about what the governors and the mayors are doing, but really the templates are going to be then used for private sector as well. So we've made a lot of progress around in these different areas, and I wanted to specifically talk about specifications and repeat something I said in Las Vegas, is that those of you who are architects, and those of you who aren't architects, are familiar with the concept of documents that are at a 10% or a 20% stage, and we aren't waiting for the specs or any of these other things to get to 100%. We're going to go hit the road with where we are at either 20% or 10%. That's good enough for getting momentum built. And so I just wanted to kind of throw in that little piece, and certainly open to listen feedback about that as we move through the presentation. But Anto, have I missed something?
Muted, Anto. Good. Since Anto's still muted, I'll jump in.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm muted.
Super. Well, Rick, thanks very much. I think that, as we moved forward with the coalition, the question is how do you articulate to the community at large, but especially policymakers in Washington and in state houses, what our message is, what we can get accomplished, what we're here to represent as a group. And we decided on the following 5 things, terms that have been thrown around a lot. I'll put a little color on each one. But let's start with interoperability. Many of you on the phone, I see lots of familiar names, have spent their careers working on interoperability for building automation systems. We've done a lot of work on it. There's a lot more work left to do. So standards like BACnet, upcoming standards like Haystack, different ways of creating interoperable open data, and data communication has been fundamental or foundational for what we're trying to do. But we'd like to think of interoperability in a little broader sense. So interoperability on a systems to systems basis, as well as interoperability with other things that might not have been traditionally thought about in buildings. So an example of that would be IT. As we see this convergence of building automation and information technology, suddenly somebody else's interoperability problems in IT are our problems. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to consider. If we look at value-added propositions that can move the needle and get a lot of payback for the society very quickly, the coalition decided that analytics and this concept of analytics everywhere would be a a great position to put forward. You know, as most of you know, there's a solid 20% energy savings in most commercial buildings to be gleaned by deploying analytics. And by analytics, I don't just mean FDD, or automatic fault detection and diagnostics, but instead enterprise analytics as well. So things like customer and vendor management, measurement and verification, energy information systems. So we need to go beyond just what's broken and how much energy it's wasting to much broader enterprise value propositions that we can bring. And as Rick mentioned, specifications are very important, because how do we match these lofty ideas to something that can be implemented today? And this is a whole component that Anto mentioned with the stack, is that how do we take these abstract ideas, which allow us to think about the industry different, and percolate them down into something that's practical today. And so we decided to come up with a series of specifications. And so far we've written a number of them, and Anto will, we'll talk about this in a further section as to what we're working on with the Division 25 spec. So I'll leave that alone. Financial model. So, you know, one might ask, after 100 years of building buildings the way we always have, through things like low bid processes, construction and specification institute components, you know, is really that the most intelligent thing to do? Buildings have changed a lot over time. The society's needs for buildings have changed. And fundamentally, it's very hard for us to put all of the capital that's needed in the building up front in a project, the way it's always been done. So consider a building a bond. And basically, when a building owner invests in a building, they're buying a bond. And the rate of return is the rents that are collected for the building. And operating costs are something to be minimized because they take away from the yield of that bond. However, what happens when you start looking at information technology? So the building I work in was built in 1880. And I can guarantee you that the people that capitalized that building weren't worried about cybersecurity. But we are now. But where does the money come from in any model that is not construction? The answer is it doesn't. And that's one of the reasons that we've had so little problem, so much trouble in this industry growing these analytics models or efficiency models. It's because there's no money available in the life cycle of the business, only in the construction cycle. So we thought we would surface this in Washington and raise some of these ideas, starting with the federal government itself. So just for instance, one of my clients is the National Institute of Health, 14 million square foot hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. Well, what do you think the energy efficiency budget is for NIH? It's zero. All of the work that gets done there has to be done on performance contracts. And if you look at performance contracting as a methodology, it's almost been entirely predicated on taking money from lighting retrofits and spreading it around. But we've gotten to the point 30 years on where we've replaced the last incandescent bulb with an LED, and we're in diminishing returns. So it's very hard to finance new operating cost models with that kind of thing. And so we've had a lot of interest in Washington about, hey, maybe if we want energy efficiency in buildings, let's not be embarrassed to pay for energy efficiency. There's a whole plank of the model that we're working on and hoping to get some more traction with. And finally, workforce is the final pillar. I think it's no surprise to anyone that we're aging out as an industry. And Melissa is going to introduce us to a number of things that are going on and a number of points of view that I think are very exciting and are going to bring some young people into the industry in with a method, with an idea in mind, rather than just praying that they're going to show up. So I'll stop there and turn it back to Anto.
Thank you. So we now move on to the Div 25 specs. Anno, not Anto, Anno.
Yes, Anno, not to be confused with Anto, right, Jim?
Yeah, there's 5 parts, right?
He owes us $5. Divisions 25-25, as Jim quite rightly said, it's good to come up with the ideas and the concepts and the strategies and the direction and have the resources behind it to push it. But at the end of the day, you need to deliver something that people can specify to ask for. We are often asked now, how do I actually ask for a smarter building? I understand the concept, I understand the stack, but what do I specifically ask for? And so that's really where specifications come in. Of course, template specifications are the most useful. We've decided to follow this kind of the format or the template that the CSI, the Construction Specifications Institute, basically has put out. If you guys are familiar with the construction industry, you probably have seen what's called the master format. CSI, that's been out for a while. That's basically, if you're familiar again, it's broken down into different divisions. Division 25 specifically talks about really what they call integrated automation. It's been around for a while. It talks about how building automation systems are integrated, and there's typically a subgroup of that which includes things like your fire suppression, plumbing, heating, HVAC, electrical communications, and electronic and safety and security. So as the way that they do their divisions, Division 25 is your big one, and then they break it down into the subsections. And 25, there's really no 25-25 in the CSI spec, so that's why we co-opted it. We are also driving this as an open community effort, and there's a call to action at the end of this as well, looking for some help. It can be a little dry, but at the end of the day, this is really where the rubber hits the road as far as helping people specify the requirements, because as we all know, that, as Anto said right at the beginning, there's just a lot of confusion at the definition of smarter, and the tools that we're providing, we're hoping to help people specify that. We can go to the next slide, Anto. The way that we look at it, it sort of follows a little bit along the lines that Jim was covering, but now more into the technological aspect of it. Obviously, in comes the smarter stack framework that Anto talked about earlier. That's a key component or the key messaging tool that we use, again, to help people identify what are you specifically looking for. Again, if you're doing specifications and you have lots of specifications, you need to be able to guide folks into the right, you need this spec or that spec because you're looking in this particular area of the smarter stack. Analytics, and Jim did a good job covering what that means. We talk about it in the much broader concept. Cybersecurity, of course, is a huge deal. You cannot have smart buildings these days without a strong infrastructure of cybersecurity. Everyone is most keenly aware of that, and it is a core component of the specifications. Interoperability, key point as well. Data isn't any good to you if it's just sitting in silos. You need to be able to get added and access to it. And of course, what's becoming significant in the last few years and significant as we move forward is both grid interactivity. So everything to do with grid interactivity, including load management, demand response, metering and measurement verifications, everything that has to do with the cost of energy, which of course rolls into ESG, which is your environmental, social and government stuff. So the way that we broke it down, if you move to the next one, again, we actually overlaid the different specification components following the CSI master format template, right? And you can see it again, 25 is the divisional number, and then 25 being the smarter building, and then the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 that you see there. And you guys can all read as much as I can. So you can see that we've broken the specifications into the layers of the stack as it makes sense. Because again, using the stack that Anto showed right at the beginning, we can guide the right people who are looking for the specific components that they're after. So for example, if you're after, if you're looking specifically in the data area, then 25-25-60, which covers data governance, specifies that in a lot of good detail for you. And then if you can pick and choose. And then as you see there, cybersecurity, it spans all sections because cybersecurity is relevant to everything that we do, top to bottom. And I think we've got a next slide, call to action. Oh, sorry, deployment, yes. There is a website. So, one of the questions is always, where do I get these specifications? So we've actually got a website that you see there that will become available. This is really where the specifications will be deployed. As I said at the beginning, we are operating in an open community format. We are encouraging as many people as possible to get involved. We know there's a lot of smart people here at this particular session and, throughout the industry who've got years of experience in this particular space and, in specific areas. There's a lot of people who've got a lot of experience in the device area, for example, that could help a lot in specifications of devices. So, if you feel like you want to contribute, we are open arms and looking for that. In fact, to that point, we've just kicked off what we call a 25-25 collaboration event. This is every Tuesday, right, Anto?
Yeah, the next week is the kickoff, but the intention is to do it every Tuesday at that time.
Right. We're open invitation. Love to have your participation. Bring your ideas. Obviously, the heavy lifting part of any specification is writing the specifications. We are more than acutely aware that most open organizations typically start with a large number of people who contribute ideas, thoughts, directions, and we're looking for that as well. And then that will typically filter down to a handful of people who actually write the actual specifications as well. So we're looking for people who can actually write specs, and using the CSI template is a good guideline for us. So it kind of lays out the format for us.
And I've put that link on in the chat, by the way, so that people can follow it. Cool. It's an event on LinkedIn. Is that it? You done, Anno?
That's it.
Okay.
Need people. Please help.
Yeah, thank you. We'll come back to the call to action again later on. But yeah. Sort of workforce. So Melissa, did you get your camera up and running or?
No, for some reason it's blocking me. I'm sorry. Maybe that's to your benefit tonight. I don't know. Maybe a little picture's better tonight.
Never.
But it's great to be here, everyone. And, with all the exciting work that Big and everyone is doing in the industry in the realm of what is possible for smarter buildings, I want to turn the discussion to scale. If our goal is to accelerate the pace of smart or smarter building adoption, then how are we doing in achieving the current rate of scale that we have today? And it doesn't take but 30 seconds of conversation in any state in the United States or Canadian province to recognize that we have significant workforce limits to growth in our industry. And when we step back and look at a few really eye-opening statistics, like the average age of experts in our industry today is 58 years old. How effective is our succession planning today throughout our industry and the development of new mentors? And one of the more shocking statistics that we have really wrapped our mind around is that today in universities, and we're deeply affiliated with universities around the country, 3% of women in technical bachelor's-oriented fields actually believe technology to be relevant to their career trajectory. And that is a very startling number, especially for those women like myself that have spent our entire career in technology. So we've got some work to do, and we have some real opportunity. But when we start looking at the workforce-related issues on the next slide, we think about what is it that we think that the future is going to look like. We have this issue of today's persistent vacancies, and my friends and colleagues and Monday Live and C4SB, we've also discussed how to be careful that we're not creating a solution for the very best buggy whip at the time that the automobile is created, and how not to have the very best 8-track tape player right as we're coming out with a compact disc. All of us are old enough, to remember some type of obsolescence. And when we think about the current vacancies that we have, what areas of improvement can we as a community look at ways to reduce the need for people in certain areas that are challenging, and then find the most creative and effective ways of solving the remaining vacancies that really are there. And so when we look at that and we move into the next slide, it brings us back to the topic of the smarter stack. If we look at the smarter stack and we think about what is it that the next generation of workers need to know, and how does that relate to existing workforce systems that are already in place, and how we as a community are able to tap that valve and be able to get flow out of it. And one of the interesting things that we find is that in some areas, there are many different occupations that require a little bit of a dose in more than one occupation, like cybersecurity. Our colleagues Steve Fay and Jim Lee certainly have lots of ideas to contribute to what entry-level people should do to, provide for a more secure, cyber-secure building. But then there are higher level things that need to be understood by others. And so one of the things that we have done is looked at the issue of proportionality. And on the next slide, we have worked in collaboration with the Department of Education and the Department of Labor to identify what is this workforce roadmap for our industry, and how many units, how many people do we truly forecast that we're going to need in our industry moving into the future of where our technology is headed. And so before we build systems to build, a position that may have 100 units available, and we might accidentally miss positions that have 10,000 units available, we wanted to make sure that we had proportionality. So what has been accomplished over the past 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic is that for the very first time in our industry, we actually have job codes where now the Department of Education and the Department of Labor are counting us, and we're noticeable. We have, for the first time, been able to tap into many of the existing workforce streams that have existed for decades and be able to help our clients and our colleagues be able to find workforce funnels that allow them to qualify for grants in their states. And we have even as recently been able to qualify for veterans benefits on, workers that come into these occupations might be able to use 12 months of their GI Bill retroactively if they give our industry a look. And so, by getting some of these larger issues addressed so that our industry can stand up and be counted and be noticed and be recognized and participate in those existing workforce systems that are in every state in the United States and exist in Canada, then what that does is give our industry the opportunity to truly look at what we need to do from a scale perspective. And when we think about how the Division 2525 will continue to evolve and how technology will continue to change, what we really want to do is make sure that we have a very collaborative community with, everyone on this call. On the next slide, I have a way to reach out. I know that Anto and Ano had the way to connect on the Division 2525 spec. But if you would like to contribute and you would like to give input into workforce topics, we would love to hear from you. We need lots of brain power on this issue, and it's something that impacts really every single company, whether we realize it or not. One of the things we know demographically is that we are truly competing for candidates with a lower flow rate into our industry than ever before. And we're also competing for keeping the people that we have in our industry from leaving our industry to go to others when they realize what great skills we have in this industry. So we would love to hear from you. We would love for us to be connected and get your ideas and get you involved.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So moving on to the last section of this presentation is project templates, which, if you recall in the timeline that Rick showed, is the one that really hasn't had as much work on it. But I'm going to hand it over to Pete to explain what this is all about. Pete.
Thanks, Anto. So as we think about trying to reach the 6 million commercial buildings in the United States and probably another 500,000 to 750,000 in Canada, and how many of those are smart already, have smart components already? It's actually a pretty small number, very, very small, certainly less than 10%, might be less than 5% in terms of really effective ways to gain efficiencies or revenues or higher productivity from smarter components in the building. So how do we go from that scenario to one where all the buildings are contributing to our collective efforts to reduce our carbon and greenhouse gas emissions on the planet, to having higher productivity in a time when productivity of the workplace is all up for grabs, and what is that going to mean? And a number of other goals that are tied to what buildings are for, and how do you apply technology to reach those? And when most of the buildings, 97% of commercial buildings are under 50,000 square feet, they don't have a lot of budget to pay for individual engineering time to come up with solutions for each one of those. So if you're going to scale a solution, you need to, and it's for buildings, you need to show people, whether the owners, the operators, or the occupants of the building, what would the benefits be of doing that? And the good news is a lot of people have Nest thermostats at home, and they expect stuff to be available on their phones. But we all, the people on this call know it's hard to actually execute that in a commercial building or an institutional building, much harder than a residential. So our goal here is to translate these specifications, this smarter stack, integrate it all together into a package that someone who has a particular type of building could see what the options are to make what is a smarter hospital look like? What is a smarter office building? What's possible there? Maybe I have a few things I did already. What's possible in addition to that for my type of building? So the goal here is to create project templates that can replicate the results for specific goals, tie together and illustrate what the right resources are, and do this in an easy way, right? So the qualities of good templates: it's easy to grasp what the purpose is, easy to adapt to my own building. You have to show it in terms of their own building, or it doesn't, people's minds, it's too much work for them. It has to be easy to price. The answer that it depends doesn't actually help people decide what to do. It needs to be easy to acquire once you have it priced up, so I can get it fairly simply, and then easy to implement so I know which vendors or suppliers can help me make it happen. The audiences for templates includes the occupants, operators, owners of buildings, the policymakers who are making resources available, or perhaps, as Rick said, making their own buildings, examples of that. But it's also the other audience for templates is us. It's the people in the industry, the vendors, to know how what we offer fits together in a broader solution. Because increasingly we're delivering smaller niche portions of the overall stack, but wouldn't it be great if a lot of people knew that our own company could do this layer of the stack or these other layers or things like that? So that's the goal with project templates. Next slide. So this is an example of a template basically for owners or operators. And this is just a single page, kind of cover template for a smarter fire station. Happens to be one in Kansas City, done a couple of years ago. And the city, in a template, you want to show what are the goals that the owner had or the operator had, healthy indoor environment, advanced controls that unify different systems for operational efficiencies, and then, in this case, sustainable benchmarking for energy and water, et cetera. So if I'm the owner or the operator, it's like, those are goals interesting to me too. Cool. Well, what components, feed into that? Well, here's laid out what components matter for those goals. And then what are the results that I might be able to expect? So you can show what the energy savings, water savings, uptime for a healthy environment, et cetera, who the vendors are, links to all of that. So for an owner of a municipal portfolio, boy, I have those goals. I have a bunch of fire stations, or I have a bunch of office buildings. Does this work for office buildings too? Oh yeah. You can use the same goals applied to office buildings, and it comes out just a little different depending on what type of building you have. So this is one example of a template for the owners or operators. Next slide. If we take what would a profile for vendors be, we could use the smarter stack as a backdrop. And consider, okay, for that fire station, what were the goals that the owner had? Next click build, what's the physical characteristics of the building? What are the systems that are in that building? We define that. And then here are the components of the smart layers that would be necessary to meet those goals on the top. And my company might be the silo on the left, or the big part in the middle, or specific to a certain system in the bottom, or maybe my company can provide the interface, the single pane of glass, or mobile or desktop or kiosk interfaces for that. And then finally, the operation thing, I might help deliver curriculum and training for the workforce. I could maybe provide remote services for that owner, or supplement what the owner's staff is. So the smarter stack is useful as a template to show how the pieces of delivery fit together in a way that delivers, all pointed towards the purpose at the top. So that's a second example of a format. If you're in the market to acquire a solution, where would you go and what would you do? And this is just a simple representation of a kind of an online marketplace where you can pick your goals. This is energy is important to me, indoor air quality is important to me, whatever. I can pick the goals. I can tailor it to my building, and then voila, instantly get a configuration for that size, that type and size building in your particular zip code that's appropriate for the goals that you picked. And then any of those components could be swapped or made more specific. There's a whole bunch of assumptions if you're doing that really fast, but you might say, oh, I have a different type of rooftop units, or I want to add solar to this, or things like that. And so a way to acquire a solution like this that is sort of instantly gives decision makers, decent ballpark pricing that can be tailored to their portfolio, decreases the friction necessary for them to buy it, and eventually, I imagine a solution where you could actually click buy, and this solution could appear in a box, and the owner could, or the operator could install it themselves, or it might come with services to do that for them. that isn't quite there yet, but eventually it could be. Today, the buy button is more like, okay, contact us and we'll put you in touch with, contact us at the coalition or at the clearinghouse for something like this, and we'll put you in touch with the vendors who can help make that happen. So these are examples of the formats for templates. The exact publishable format is still in development. We're headlining them or categorizing templates as by building types. So smarter schools, smarter municipal buildings like the fire station, office buildings, greenhouses. It's another, indoor agriculture is coming up. And we need many, many more. So the ones on the left are kind of already in development among our committee. The ones on the right are examples of ones that we've thought of, and I'm sure so many people on this call have worked in other types of buildings and have an idea of what a solution takes to do it in that building. So we welcome your ideas, your input. If you have a great idea of what a template needs to be generically, please let us know. If you have a very specific idea about what a template for a certain solution is, please let us know. So
Great.
That's Project Templates.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. So we're wrapping this up. I just want to make one sort of interesting comment. A lot of us have mentioned the word scale. And one of the calculations that I've done in my head that I share quite often is that assuming that there are 5 million buildings in the US that needs to be made smarter, right? So what does that mean to us if we can actually do that? Let's just take 5 million. Let's say we're not going to do all of it immediately. Let's just take 20% of it, 1 million. Right, with 1 million buildings, let's say we're going to take 5 years to do it, right, which is pretty conservative, right? So that's 200,000 buildings a year, and if you do the calculation, that comes down to 800 buildings a day. So the question that I always ask this group and our audience is that the way this industry is doing things today, is there any hope in hell to actually deliver anything like 800 buildings a day? And I think it's really sort of difficult to sort of figure out how to do that unless we productize and make things into templates and have specs that can actually be used at scale. So that was my closing comment on that. I think it's what's going on here is really sort of a very interesting movement to create a community of people to make buildings smarter. We need you to help us do this, because this is a big task, and we really need your participation. And the first one of those is what Anno mentioned at the end of his presentation. And I'm going to leave that up, and I'm going to hand it back to Brad.
Can I just stress, Anto, before you do, when we say we need you, as I said in my little session too, different people can contribute different things, right? Don't feel like, we have to get you to do everything. There are people who've got great ideas, people who can do great specifications, people who've got great templates. So anything and everything that you can bring to the equation, we're looking for.
I'd also point out that even though they're a huge number to write, we've already done 5 or 6 of them. So we're not starting from scratch here, but we are starting from scratch and asking for people to help and jump in. So please do.
Brad, are you there? No?
Well, we're waiting for Brad. There are a couple of questions that Brad did say would be addressed at the end and in the chat, and a couple of them are some of the questions we would anticipate. I wanted to potentially just jump in and talk about a couple of those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So John brought up the question about have we been collaborating with CSI, and have we been trying to align with other industry groups like ASHRAE and maybe BOMA, just in terms of like the language and the definitions of building types and things like that. I don't know if y'all can read the chat or not, see the chat, but wanted to talk about that a little bit. In our initial meetings in DC, it turns out that most of these organizations do have DC representatives as well. So we have had contact with ASHRAE, we've had contact with BOMA, we've had contact with NIST. Who else have we had contact with? A bunch of
NASCO,
yeah.
Department of Energy, and obviously the White House, and there does seem to be a clear lane and a need for some of the specific things that we are focusing on with those 5 pillars. But we do want to continue to have really positive interaction with all these different organizations, and CSI is one specifically where we've reached out to a couple different regional folks. But if anybody has any magic connections to get us to CSI, so that we can make sure that the work we're doing is copacetic with the way they do things and the way they want things organized, et cetera, that would be awesome.
Great. Brad, are you there?
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yay.
All right. When I put my Bluetooth headphones in, it didn't want to cooperate with the microphone. So, thanks. I really wanted to say thank you for all of these presenters and for all the work that Monday Live and C4SB is doing. I think this is a wonderful vision of what it's going to take to really achieve the goals that both of our groups have in common. So, wanting to make sure that we're able to put that call out to help to contribute in any of these areas we can, from the education that Melissa mentioned, from the spec writing and putting the framework together and templating. So I want to encourage everybody out there to reach out and participate wherever you can. There are a couple of other questions. I think you just answered the one about the CSI. We had one about what types of organizations are you creating with, or partnering with to create this spec: manufacturers, integrators, software companies, all of the above. That was from Alex Grove.
All the above.
Well, I will say one thing from a workforce standpoint. We do have some really effective collaborations with all of the partners that Rick mentioned, but we're also working with them from a curriculum development standpoint to make sure that those standards are woven into the jobs that actually have to help implement them. And we are fortunate that we do have some major OEMs that are coming aboard to be sponsors with some of our workforce related efforts. And those announcements continue to unfold, and we've got some exciting announcements that we'll be sharing at the Niagara Summit. So, the more people that know about what we're doing, that helps get others interested in supporting the effort. So we truly appreciate BIG for getting the word out.
Our pleasure. Let's see, we had some more questions here. I don't think this one came up. Is there any thought to coordinate the templates with other industry organizations, building types, i.e. ASHRAE building types?
When you say templates, you mean the smarter stack or the...
John, you want to jump in and you could ask your question for yourself?
Yeah, no, I was referring to, I believe ASHRAE has in their analysis of buildings and that they have various building types. Now I was just in relation to your project templates, you might want to take a look if they align with how they have set up their building types, so to speak.
Yeah. ASHRAE and IEA and others, we're trying to weave a bunch of those together, but appreciate the as you know, it's not easy to match up all the language. Another one that John brought up, another question was this perception of smart costing a lot or costing more. That goes to one of the things that Jim was talking about, is that we want to dispel the myth of it smart costs X more. The fact is that smart may actually become more cost effective, not just in life cycle, but also in first cost. If we could get some consistency around specifications and volume, if you will, it could be that smart doesn't have to cost any more. And that's one of the reasons we're doing the templates. One of the things that one of the things that has been specifically asked for to these policymakers is, what does it cost? And they're very interested in what does it cost and what are the benefits? And so that is absolutely one of the focus we've got, is making sure that this perception of it being prohibitively expensive, that we dispel that in multiple different dimensions.
One thing I would like to contribute to that, it's very important to recognize, particularly if you're on the design engineering side, that many of these property owners and companies that maintain these buildings are finding very serious, persistent workforce vacancies in their realm. And there's growing interest to be able to associate the Division 2525 type smarts with being able to optimize labor footsteps. You know, back in a decade ago, we were all figuring out how we could show how what we're doing is saving on carbon footprint, but true human footprint savings is a very interesting aspect of showing what it costs not to make your building smarter. That, you know, we've got one hospital client right now that has over 70 vacancies that they've not been able to fill. We've got large state governments that have massive vacancies, and universities. So it's an important thing to understand the connectivity and the inextricable link between how we approach technology and people and buildings.
Yeah, I was just going to throw in, I know you want to end here, but just two other quick comments. Well, you know, when LEED first came out, this is sort of parallel to that. LEED's too expensive. I can't put it in my building. It's not worth the time, et cetera. But as LEED panned out, you could LEED certify your buildings at same or less construction costs and actually get a lot of value out of that with energy and other things, wellness, et cetera. And then, of course, LEED has a certification program for buildings. I don't know if there's been any thought as the SMART initiative proceeds, do you want to get to a point where you're certifying your building as smarter if it has these different parameters?
We're working on that, and we're studying the various smart rating systems and benchmarking of the existing buildings. And Anto has had Spire present. We can present on our building intelligence quotient. Smart Score is being promoted widely by the real estate people. So we'd be happy to help.
Yeah, we've discussed this on a number of Monday Live shows. It's an important topic that we're still unsure exactly how we can help from a Monday Live perspective, but maybe this is different now that we have some of these tools available to us. Brad, did you want to share those other two slides that I have?
Let's pull up the big one and take a look at that real quick. So I navigated over to mondaylive.org and I found the link prominently displayed on the front page for the Smarter Stack template. And I found it was really easy to use to put all of this together. I'd been dragging my feet on putting it together because I wasn't sure what effort it was going to take for me to Photoshop it, and gladly not any effort at all. So we ended up just stacking up the building intelligence group just to show how we thought about this. It's something that maybe isn't intended to be described on the Smarter Stack. I thought maybe comparing and contrasting would give us all a little more intuition about how it's used. So at that physical layer, we need a meeting location, whether that's going to be in person or virtual. The systems, in our case, it's these intelligent individuals who come together to be able to make this happen. The data we're bringing is this intelligent building information and exchanging that on the networking and knowledge exchange level. And to us, the applications that we are trying to provide are education and research and community service. Research, community service being some of those longer-term goals that we have as we're spinning up more committees. For us, delivery means getting together and having these gatherings and events. How we operate, well, that's kind of our structure of the organization, which is our executive committee and the subcommittees that work together. So the programs and collaborations committee that I serve on that help put this program on. We've got a membership and marketing committee. They're kind of breaking off now into marketing and separate membership committees, and finance and rules and regulations. So Those are committees that I'm plugging if anybody wants to participate in that. We're always looking for more hands to make light work. And at the end of the day, what is our purpose? It's really trying to drive this intelligent building adoption. That's where we align very well with C4SB and Monday Live. So just thought it was an interesting exercise to be able to do. I'll put it up here as a straw man. If anybody wants to poke some holes in it, discuss why it works, why it doesn't work. We're right at time. I don't know how folks feel about sticking on. If you got to drop off, go ahead. But I thought this might be interesting for us to at least display.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things about the Smarter Stack is that a number of people have used it not for buildings, for different things, and it works. And so it's in a way it's actually a generic communication tool that is very interesting.
We put another one together for how do you buy intelligent buildings.
Do you want to put that up?
Oh, we go through it really quick here.
There you
go. So, I think we got to really start from the top, right? What is the real perspective that Anna talks about when we're looking at how to view this stack? If we're going to be somebody who is having to buy this, if you're the owner, you want the purpose on top to be making your buildings more intelligent. The rest is kind of taken from the perspective of the general contractor who is having to buy these projects. And we've had great conversations with GCs who have participated in the big TC events, being able to understand what their perspectives and limitations are in managing and buying this has been very instructive. So we want to help their operations by helping to streamline them being able to buy this, and ultimately for the end user, streamlining their building operations, their portfolio management. How do we deliver these buildings right now? We've got this procurement and construction layer to be able to take things that are from these bottom layers and turn them into something that's tangible. For us, those apps, the application of the knowledge is the technical solutions that are built. We exchange through the design build, collaboration, interoperability between the different systems to be able to enhance the intelligence of the building. To me, this is a big thing that I like to talk about is what data do we really have? How do we really talk about intelligent buildings? It's not look at this cool technology. It's really what are the use cases? How do we develop use cases that are based on business needs that our clients have that are really going to get them to understand the value and open up their pocketbooks to invest? At the systems level, we have to begin by writing that scope and owner's project requirements to feed all the way back up. And then at the physical level, it's what's the site? What are we building on? So is there any feedback on that? Very interested to hear how people think about this use of the stack.
I did wonder about this when you shared this with me earlier, Brad, and I did wonder about the delivery, and given the comments that Jim made earlier, there may be a slightly different view of that could be possible. I don't know, Jim, if you care to chime in, certainly on the operations side of things.
Well, I think that we'd like to figure out how to square the fact that society and buildings change very quickly now with this idea that that everything is capital and has to go in at the inception. Whereas, many of these life cycle costs are not considered right now. So we'd love to figure out how to change the dialogue to get those included as well.
Maybe this is just a good illustration of where this butts against the challenge we have when we try and deliver this stuff through a general contractor, and it maybe shows that that's not necessarily the smoothest way it can be done, but I think it shows, illustrates some of the friction that can happen. Most of the stuff might need to be direct to owner, but again, I think there's ways to be able to try and enhance the process with a consultant. As an engineer who's approaching this, it's something that I know that we can be doing, because there are other opportunities you lose if you're not incorporating some of these concepts during that design phase, during the selection of products. Now you start closing doors because things can't be interoperable. So I'm a very big believer in figure this stuff out early with the owner, bring your MSI on early so they can be able to help test. So I think there's some give and take, but I agree that there is maybe illustrating where there is a little bit of the oil and water.
No, I think that I'm total agreement there. But things like procurement and open bidding are very good for commodities. But as the world gravitates more towards professional services, so if we look at building automation becoming IT, and IT really becoming a professional service, or energy efficiency really being, if you look at fields like commissioning, they're really professional services. They don't lend themselves very well to a traditional spec up front 30 years in advance framework. And I'd love to figure out how to put those two things together.
It's a very good point. You know, we find as well that the subscription delivery model does not necessarily jive with the bid spec model. And it really is about the services and not just about delivering a capital project.
Right.
And
Well,
thanks to Max for chiming in to say he signed up for next week. That's great. Hopefully others can, and hopefully you can spread the word.
Excellent. Well, that's a positive note. Why don't we wrap up on that? And
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
thanks again to Monday Live, C4SB. Thanks for everybody who joined us, and looking forward to participating with each of you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. See you guys.
Thanks, Theo.